Welcome in the latest episode of that SEC podcast. I'm your host, Michael Bratton. I go by SEC Mike on Twitter, and that is the dean over there. You know him, senior editor over at Athlon Sports, Stephen Lassan. How's it going, Stephen?
Mike, it is going great. We are one day closer to game day, so no complaints here. We've even had a little groomers back in the news. So I guess it's a typical weekend around here in the SEC. Looking forward to getting to week 4 and seeing what happens here.
Yeah, so again, this is the episode each week. Stephen is going to give us his predictions for the upcoming SEC slate. And then after that, Cousin Shane's going to hop on. We're going to do a back-to-back episodes. We're going to do a mailbags with Cousin Shane. But before we get into all that, got to let you fine folks know we are brought to you by MyBookie, the online sportsbook. Head on over to MyBookie today. That website is mybookie.ag, and put in that promo code THAT-SEC. That's THAT-SEC over at MyBookie. Just sign up for a new account. You put in that promo code, and they're willing to match your initial deposit all the way up to $1,000 today over at MyBookie. So, Stephen, we need you to give us some MyBookie winners here in your lock of the week. Are you feeling confident? Last week you were pretty good. You missed your lock, but overall, I think your picks were pretty outstanding.
I'm feeling optimistic, Mike. I feel like we've maybe hit our stride, because we got a couple weeks of tape to review. Now, all that being said, that really means we're going to have a bad week. It is. I don't know how maybe you feel about this, Mike, but it kind of feels like it's the last week of the preseason.
Yeah.
It feels like we're getting ready to get into this regular season, and we're just going to get conference games. So I'm going to be excited to not have to worry about so many blowouts, get into some of these really kind of awesome conference games going forward.
Yeah. All right. So, Stephen, let's get into it then. We don't have any prize picks this week because they just updated their board like literally minutes before we went live. So Steve is going to give me his prize pick selections for tomorrow's show, and we'll relay that to all the cousins out there. But let's get into the action, Stephen, and we're gonna leave the big SEC games. We're gonna do those last. That's how we always like to do it. So I'm kind of going in order of the kickoffs, starting with the non-conference showdowns, and let's go first of all. Got these little handy graphics. Let's see if they work this time. They didn't work last episode. Ohio, Stephen, at Kentucky. Kentucky favored by 20 points. The over-under is 41.5. This game kicks off at 12:45 Eastern on the SEC Network. Does Kentucky finally bounce back here and get a win after consecutive losses in conference play?
I like Kentucky straight up here, Mike. I think some interesting kind of tidbits about Kentucky's kind of recent non-conference matchups. You go back to Eastern Kentucky where they barely beat EKU a few years ago. They beat Northern Illinois by 8 points. They also beat Chattanooga by 5 points in 2021. So some of these non-conference games have been maybe a little bit too close for comfort if you are for Kentucky. I think the question for me is Kentucky, with expending all of that energy last week trying to beat Georgia, can you come back against an Ohio team that's pretty eager for the upset? We've already seen Northern Illinois pick off Notre Dame. Toledo picked off Mississippi State. So MAC teams have been giant killers. So there is sort of a be careful, beware here if you're Kentucky. One positive, a few weeks ago when Ohio played Syracuse, they gave up over 350 passing yards. I think that's good for Kentucky because I think you want to get Brock Vandagriff going, especially with SEC play coming up after this and sort of the heart of conference play. So I like Kentucky 31, Ohio 13. I think this game might be a slog. Kentucky starts slow because of the momentum and energy expended last week, but I think eventually they pull away. So give me the Wildcats 31, the Bobcats 13.
And I've got the schedule pulled up here, Stephen. Again, just in case anybody has kind of forgotten it. But Kentucky scored 6 2 weeks ago against South Carolina at home, and then 12 against Georgia, again, at home. How many points will it take? Again, we're not going to learn a ton about Kentucky's offense playing Ohio at home, but I guess the better way to phrase this question, Stephen, how few points will cause you to be smashing that panic button of Kentucky's offense? Like, let's say if they score like 14 points, are you smashing that panic button? How many points do you need to see, I guess, to feel a little bit more comfortable about Brock Vandagriff and Bush Hamden and the unit we have there in Kentucky?
That's a great question. So I think Ohio is in the 100s in defensive success pass defense. So it's very vulnerable. And given that, Kentucky put up 31 against Southern Miss, I think Ohio is a little bit better than Southern Miss. I think you need to get at least into the 30s here. If Kentucky hits 13, 17, 20 points, I'm going to be a little concerned because this Ohio defense is probably not a shutdown defense, even in the MAC. So a 20-point performance is alarming. I think they should have plenty of opportunities here to get to at least 30 in the victory. So if this offense struggles, I think that's a huge, huge sign of concern before, like I said, you go into the heart of SEC play.
Right. And that fire Mark Stoops' chants will only be getting louder if that happens. God forbid they lose the game. Well,
oh, man, if they lose this game, yeah.
Give me a scale 1 to 100. 1 being fewest, obviously, 100 being the most. What concern that Kentucky could somehow lose this game?
Probably under 50. I'd say probably closer to like 20 or 30. And the only reason why I would have it is this kind of the recent history. Like I mentioned, the Northern Illinois, the Chattanooga, the Eastern Kentucky, sort of those close games against teams they should be beating by more. So, it's a little, my alarm is a little raised here, but it's not at kind of a level 5, if you will.
I got you. Hey, shout out to real quick cousin JR. Every show he gifts somebody a membership to the channel. So we appreciate you, cousin JR. We also appreciate you, cousin Sam. You're the one that got gifted the membership. And I'm trying to catch up on some of these comments. Stephen, one of these was hilarious. It said, your internet's a little bad. We don't know what's going on there, but someone said, looks like you were coming from another dimension. Someone else said, I had to program you before the show to get going. So the commenters always live up. They're funnier than we are, I always say. But all right, Stephen, let's go to the next matchup here. Another non-conference cream puff type game. ULM at Texas. Texas favored by 44.5 points with the over-under 52.5 points. That's Tennessee territory right there, Stephen. Over-under 52.5. And the game kicks off 7 o'clock Central on ESPN and SEC Network Plus. How many is Texas winning this game by?
Give me Texas 59, ULM 7, Mike. I think Texas takes care of business easily. Keep in mind here, ULM is the worst of the 3 teams they've played in, the worst of the 4 non-conference games because they've played UTSA and Colorado State. Both of those teams are better. They won by 52 and 49. I know you can't necessarily go A plus B equals C on some of this scoring, but great opportunity to get Arch Manning a full game, full week of prep. The biggest thing here for me is if you're Texas, play a lot of players, don't get anybody hurt. Louisiana Monroe, I'm sure, is going to try and run the ball and try to shorten the game. That's kind of what they've been somewhat successful at in doing in some of their other 2 games they've played this year against Jackson State and UAB. I just don't see General Booty in the Louisiana Monroe offense being able to put together enough consistent drives to make this one competitive. So give me Texas 59, ULM 7.
Mm-hmm. And this is going to sound like a crazy question, Stephen, but just go with me here because I don't anticipate this happening. But I guess we assume Arch Manning's going to start, right? And they'll give Quinn Ewers a break here for conference plays is right around the corner. But what if Arch starts and struggles? And again, that's highly unlikely with all these weapons and the talent he's got. But if he struggles against ULM, could that be a godsend to Texas to where we can stop with all this nonsense? Arch going to Heisman. Should Arch be starting? Yada, yada, yada. Like, and when I say struggle, I mean, like maybe the final score is like 35-7 instead of, 60-7 or something like that. Could that be good for Texas if Arch doesn't look superhuman this week?
That's an interesting way of looking at it. I think, no matter what, I think Quinn Ewers is definitely the guy for Texas. So I mean, I guess to maybe to use a quote we've kind of thrown around the last couple of weeks is the press clippings. You buy too much into the press clippings, and then maybe your team doesn't show up to play. So I guess maybe if you look at it, if you're a Sarkisian, you know that Ewers is your guy. Maybe Arch throws an interception or two. Maybe he's not 100% sharp, then that ends the debate for a week. So I don't know if it'd necessarily be the greatest thing in the world. I think if you're Texas, you just want to see Arch take care of business. But I suspect Sarkisian will pour some cold water on any kind of quarterback debate after this one if Arch plays well. It's Ewer's job, I think.
Right. Yeah, and other than that, I mean, we're just, quite frankly, Texas is playing so well. There's not a ton that we can glean off this game. Do you think, aside from maybe some of our younger players, how they're looking?
Yeah, I think that's really kind of what I look for in these matchups, and especially considering how one-sided it's going to be. And I remember, Mike, when you and I talked after the bowl game last year for Texas A&M, we talked about how impressive we are, or how impressed we were with Marcel Reed. And I think every game is an opportunity to find a player, find something about that you can kind of file away for next year, or even later this year. So I'm looking at some of the younger players. I mean, Colin Simmons, the defensive lineman for Texas, has been so impressive as a true freshman. So it really is, to me, it's Arch plus some of the younger players. And if there's anybody you can give a small snap count to keep them healthy for Oklahoma and Georgia coming up, you got to do it.
Mm-hmm. All right, how about this one, Stephen? Staying in the state of Texas, let's go Bowling Green at Texas A&M. A&M favored by 23 points. The over-under's 52.5. This game kicks off 6:30 Central Time on ESPN and SEC Network Plus. Does A&M keep that momentum train going after whooping on Florida last week?
I think so. I will say I think Bowling Green is better than Ohio. And so if you're trying to compare like the MAC teams versus the SEC this week, that's kind of something to keep in mind. Also, Bowling Green gave Penn State a kind of tough challenge a few weeks ago. They only lost by 7 points in Happy Valley. They also beat Georgia Tech last season. So they have been pesky against power conference opponents. And they have a pretty experienced two deep coming into this year. Connor Bazelak, their quarterback, he started in the SEC. He started a ton of games for them at Bowling Green. So I think they're kind of one of those opponents where you don't want to let them hang around. That being said, I like the way that A&M played last week at Florida. I think Marcel Reed likely on track to start here again. Bowling Green's experience probably keeps it close for a while, but I think A&M just pulls away late. So give me Texas A&M 40, Bowling Green 17.
Ooh, 40-17, Stephen. And do you think that let's say that's the case, they win this game handily, 3-1. I mean, obviously 4-0 would be better, but 3-1 with a new coaching staff and all that. That would set up really, really well for A&M. And considering there was a road game, considering there was a top 10 showdown, I think 3-1 to start the Mike Elko era would be, I'm trying to give it a grade here in my mind, maybe like a B+ start. Would you agree with that, or am I being too kind?
No, I would go with B+ because I think they've got, if it looked better since that game against Notre Dame. Now, granted, that's McNeese State. That's a very bad Florida defense right now, so we're kind of grading on the curve. I think if anything, if you're Texas A&M, take care of business. Go out and handle Bowling Green. It's a matchup you're favored in by almost or just over 3 touchdowns. Take care of business, impress, and get ready for the heart of SEC play with Arkansas and Missouri. So they had the rough opener. But if you kind of rebound here and you win 3 in a row and you kind of figure out what you can do offensively with Marcel Reed, that'd be a step in the right direction. So if A&M takes care of business and they beat Arkansas, I think you have to kind of look positively on that schedule still with Missouri and and LSU coming into College Station this year.
And I think I've asked everybody this, Steven, so I apologize. But again, let Marcel Reed, we have to assume he's going to start. Let's say he plays really well again, continues his confidence. Would you roll with him if it plays out the way you're predicting, a huge win here? Would you roll with him going into this Arkansas showdown? Or if Connor Wigman's 100%, would you throw him in there? How would you handle that quarterback situation?
I am still a believer in Connor Wigman, but I think if Marcel Reed plays well against Bowling Green, offense performs, kind of as we expect, they don't have a slow, or kind of sluggish output, I would stick with him. I think that it's interesting to see maybe a healthy Connor Wigman and Marcel Reed, but I think maybe Marcel Reed's a little bit better fit for this offense right now. So I would stick with him. If he plays well, A&M wins, no concerns offensively this week, I would stick with him against Arkansas and going forward.
Yeah, I feel bad for him, but it was interesting all off season, Stephen. We would say it was so redundant. Can he stay healthy? And these Aggies got so mad at us saying, "What the hell? He only got hurt one time, and then literally one game into the season, he's hurt again."
Yeah.
So I hate it for him though. But all right, let's move on to this one, Stephen. Akron at South Carolina. South Carolina, a 28-point favorite. The spread is 45. The over-under is 45.5 total points. 7:30 Eastern kick on ESPNU. And the latest information, Lenora Sellers, according to Shane Beamer, says he's going to play. Is that some gamesmanship? I don't know, but let's just assume Sellers plays when you're making your prediction here, Stephen. Who wins this one?
So I think to kind of compare a little bit for the fans, like where Akron is compared to Bowling Green and compared to Ohio, they are clearly worse than those other two teams. Akron is picked as one of the worst teams in the MAC this year. And, Joe Moorhead is their head coach. I think he's a much better coach than his record at Akron. I think this is just a really difficult place to coach. And their start to their season, they lost by 32 points to Rutgers and by 46 to Ohio State. So they've had some kind of tests that we can kind of gauge, final score, not necessarily indicative of everything here, but they've been pretty far behind the power conference teams that they played to start this season. So I think even if Lenora Sellers doesn't play, if it's Robbie Ashford, there are plenty of opportunities here to, number one, work on the passing game, continue to build that depth at receiver, and Rocket Sanders in that ground game for South Carolina. Akron's defense, it's not been great this year against the run. Probably in MAC play, they might be a little bit better, but you're going up against an SEC offensive line and rushing attack. I think that's a tough place to be. Curious, too, about South Carolina because they expended a lot of energy last week against LSU. You also have that first game of the year where they played really close against Old Dominion. They've had a very unusual start to the season. So all that being said, I like South Carolina 41, Akron 10. This one's tough to kind of project, like you said, because of Sellers. But I think Akron is just kind of at that level where even if Robbie Ashford starts, I think South Carolina's got a good chance to cover.
Mm-hmm. And again, we're getting a lot of comments, Stephen, on just, what is the ceiling for this South Carolina team? Again, same thing I said about Elko. I know it's a different story because it's not a first-year coach and all that, but I would think a 3-1 start to the season. I mean, we were a hair away from 4-0. I get it, but a 3-1 start for the Gamecocks, I think that's. Give me an A grade for that because I don't think many people had South Carolina going 3-1 to open. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. And I think it's not only just the wins and losses, it's also some of the things that we've seen during the season, just because the defense has looked, kind of continuing at the end of last season, what we saw, Dylan Stewart being so good as a freshman. The defense is capable of kind of carrying them. Also, I think from game 1 to game 3, I've seen progress out of Lenora Sellers, and it's going to take more to get him to where South Carolina hopes. But I think 3-1 with a close loss to LSU, give me an A for Shane Beamer in the first 4 games of the season if it works out that way.
And I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, Stephen, but again, with what they'll have 2 weeks to prepare for Ole Miss at home, Ole Miss will still be I mean, we'll get to Georgia Southern in a minute, and not. I mean, who knows? Kentucky. Hell, they nearly knocked off Georgia, so I shouldn't laugh at Kentucky. But 2 weeks to prepare. You're getting them at home. I don't know how much stuff like the Juice Wells drama. I don't know how much that. I'm sure there's players on this team are going to be pretty fired up, but I would not, just based on what we've seen from South Carolina's defense thus far. I gave them virtually no chance to beat Ole Miss prior to the season starting, but I give them a puncher's chance against Ole Miss now that I know what South Carolina has. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think if you asked me in the preseason if it was Kentucky or South Carolina who would have a better chance to beat them, I probably would have said Kentucky, but I would go South Carolina now. Number one, it's on the road at Williams-Brice. We just saw LSU have their hands full at South Carolina, and also I think with the South Carolina defensive front, there's maybe some things you can do to slow down Jackson Dart. So, yeah, I would upgrade their chances probably from like 2% to 15 or something at this point.
Mm-hmm. All right, how about this one, Stephen? Again, I was just mocking it, so. The Georgia Southern at Ole Miss. I just can't get over this schedule. But Ole Miss favored by 35 points. I don't think they've been less than a 24-point favorite this season, and they've covered every single week, to my knowledge. The over-under 66.5. This game kicks off at 6:45 Central on the SEC Network. How large of a whooping is Ole Miss going to give Georgia Southern here?
So there actually is kind of an interesting angle between these two teams. Clay Helton is the head coach at Georgia Southern. You may remember he was the head coach at USC. He was working under Lane Kiffin at one point when Lane Kiffin was the head coach at USC. So he may have a little bit of insight into Lane Kiffin. I'm not really sure it's going to matter, though, because Georgia Southern's defense is struggling so much as the stats indicate. And also we've seen through the first couple of weeks of the season, they struggled to stop the run against Boise. And I just don't think they can keep pace here with the Ole Miss offense. So I like Ole Miss 55, Georgia Southern 13.
And Robert's getting mad. He's a big rebel. I mean, again, we can't mock people. Furman, MTSU, and Wake Forest, and he says, look at Tennessee. Not that Tennessee's, I mean, is that comparable to Chattanooga, NC State, and Kansas? I mean, I see one outlier of those 6 teams I just mentioned, but maybe it's just me, Steven. I'll let that go. But again, so Ole Miss is going to cruise to 4-0 and set up his showdown with Kentucky. But then, again, we sit here and mock the schedule. 8 conference games in the final 8. That's not a task any team truly wants. So could we be sitting here again? South Carolina looks better. Let's say Oklahoma knocks off Tennessee. All of a sudden, Oklahoma looks better. Could this be a gauntlet? And maybe Arkansas. Maybe they knock off Auburn. All of a sudden, Georgia. We could have 5 murderers row back to back to back. I guess you could spin it that way, but I don't even know if there's a question here, Stephen, but basically, are you laughing at Ole Miss schedule as hard as I am, and the rest of the country, frankly?
Well, I mean, let's be honest here. It's been pretty soft. But I think here's what I like about that: when you play a soft schedule, I like to see domination, and that's what they've done. They've taken care of business. That's what matters. If they were winning by 3 points, I'd be concerned. I think on their schedule, Mike, I think what's interesting is those bye weeks. They kind of set up nice. Like you play kind of a couple tough games, off week. You get an off week later in the season after the Georgia game, but you do have to go to Arkansas before you play Georgia. Yeah. And you've got a road game, of course, at LSU. So this is not, I think in SEC play, it's not going to be a cakewalk for this team. Now, and this is coming from someone who is very high on Ole Miss. I think Ole Miss can make the final 4 teams in college football at the end of the year, but this schedule that definitely has some landmines to come.
All right. So, we're running out of cupcakes here, Stephen. Let's do the final one here before we get to the main course here. UCLA at LSU. And man, oh man. I'm still trying to scratch my head, trying to figure out why SEC Nation's at this game. LSU's favored by 24 points, Stephen. Over under 56.5 points. This game kicks off 2:30 Central on ABC. I mean, Joe Tess and them are going to be at this game. This is wild, Stephen. And you've been saying since the offseason that UCLA was going to be arguably one of, if not the worst team in the Big Ten. Has it played out that way?
It absolutely has. So let's talk through UCLA's first couple games of the season. They struggled to beat Hawaii in the season opener, which granted, Hawaii's tough to beat at home, so there's no shame. They got waxed by Indiana last Saturday night in the Rose Bowl. Indiana's got a first-year coach. They got a lot of new players. So what I'm trying to tell you is, if UCLA isn't the 18th best team in the Big Ten, they're probably 16 or 17, and they're really struggling this year. Deshaun Foster is their new head coach, and Eric Bieniemy is their offensive coordinator. So they've got some big-time names on that staff. The problem is they've been held under 100 rushing yards in their first two games. Their best player is their running back, TJ Harden. I'm telling you this because their line of scrimmage is a big issue here, and they have a lot of injuries on the defensive front for this game. You can see where I'm going. If they can't score, they can't move it. I know LSU's defense might give up some yards here, but I just think this is a great matchup for Garrett Nussmeier and LSU's offense. UCLA's pass defense is a major issue too. I've talked a lot about UCLA. I haven't mentioned a strength yet, except for TJ Harden and Ethan Garber is probably their two best players, their quarterback and running back. It's a blowout. Give me LSU 45, UCLA 17.
Now, how about this, though, Stephen? Same thing I asked you about Kentucky and their struggling offense. How many points will it take for this LSU defense? Again, 27 to Southern Cal, that's not horrible, but they let them drive the length of the field there at the end to win it. 21 to Nichols, I still think that was disgraceful. And then last week, 33 to South Carolina, but you got to take into consideration their quarterback missed half the game. Had he played, they probably would have scored 40 or more. How many points is it going to take for the defense to limit UCLA before you say, okay, we're seeing some progress here? Like if UCLA scores 20 points, is that a horrible sign for LSU's defense because of how bad UCLA is?
That's a good question. So UCLA has scored 29 points through the first two games of the season.
Combined,
yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah. I think if you're LSU, the goal here ought to be to keep UCLA under 20. Now, if the first team defense holds UCLA to 7 and they give up a couple touchdowns in the fourth quarter, I could live with that. But I will be alarmed if UCLA's offense, which has been struggling all year, hits big plays in this game, and LSU's first team defense is struggling to put them away. That'd be very concerning for me. I don't think this LSU defense is going to be a shutdown group, but this is a matchup that they should play well in. So when we talk on Monday, we may have to we'll have some good data to assess this defense for LSU.
Mm-hmm. Okay, now we get into the meat of the schedule here, Stephen. But before we do, again, I want to remind everybody we're brought to you by MyBookie, the online sportsbook. Head on over to MyBookie today. Put in that promo code, that SEC, that's THATSEC, over at mybookie.ag. And what's that get you, Stephen? That gets you an instant 100% deposit match today. Come on, minimum $50. You can spare $50. Put $50 in there, you get 100. You can't beat it over at MyBookie. This is the best way to help the show. And the best way you can help, Stephen, is to accurately name these winners for these folks after last week's disgraceful performance. So let's go into conference play, of course. Florida, speaking of disgraceful, Florida at Mississippi State. My word, Stephen, somehow Florida, they had to favor somebody, I guess. Florida favored by 6. The over-under is 58.5 total points, and thank goodness they're hiding this game, sort of. I mean, it is on ESPN, but it's 11 a.m. Central, noon Eastern kickoff. Who do you like in this rock fight here?
Yeah, Mike, like I said on Monday, it's got JP Sports vibes written all over it. I mean, it's like early kickoff. Maybe everybody's a little sluggish on the night before. What I want to see in this game is two teams who were embarrassed at home last week. Which one gets off the mat and which one shows some fight here? If you're Mississippi State, you were pushed around by Toledo last week. Offensive and defensive lines, big question here. Defense as a whole for Mississippi State. Can they turn this around in a week? Show some fight. You've got Florida coming in, who's also pretty wounded at this point, and you also have all the distractions for Florida, the Billy Napier future, two kind of losses where they were pretty much dominated by Miami and Texas A&M. So I'm interested just to see kind of the fight in both of these teams. The one stat that kind of jumps out to me when you're evaluating this matchup is Mississippi State's rush defense is giving up about 214 rushing yards a game this season. That is great news if you're Montrell Johnson and the Florida rushing attack. So I think if Florida can do that, if they can run the ball, they can kind of play keep away, keep Mississippi State's offense on the sideline. I'm not sure Mississippi State can get enough stops here. I think Florida can get a couple. I know their defense isn't much better at this point. So I am going to go with Florida and Montrell Johnson on the road getting a 34-24 victory in Starkville and saving the firing line for Billy Napier for a week.
If Florida fans even want that, I don't think they do. You know?
Right. I mean, if in some, I guess, sick way, if you're a Florida fan, if you lose to Mississippi State, it just sort of speeds up the process and, it's over. But I mean, we talked about this on Monday, Mike. It's got to be over, right? I mean, the vibes are not, there's no way. I think it feels like the fans are done with them. And I guess maybe you could say the team is still fighting to some extent, but.
Right. And it's so fascinating because maybe you can help me with this because this is so confusing. And I try to keep up with this stuff. I know you do as well. You do better than anybody. But let's say Sunday, Florida fires Billy Napier. Does that mean that Florida players have 30 days and they can jump in the portal immediately? Like, how does that all work?
So it's a little confusing, and there's been some conflicting info here, but I believe the latest that I believe is that is not during the season anymore. It is just out of season. So, and this may be part of the calculus too, is if you're a team that has a head coach on the hot seat or you want to fire somebody, you wait till game 5 or 6. And that way nobody can redshirt. They have to play out the year. That could be part of the calculus on some of these coaching changes this year. So maybe just keep an eye on the mid-season for when you start to see some of these changes.
Mm-hmm. And so since last we met, I'm not sure you saw this, Stephen, but it was Pete Thamel reported that there is not a rush essential or urgency. I can't remember what word he used, but he essentially said there is no urgency or rush at Florida within the powers that be, the administration, whatever, to fire Billy Napier today. So he's not saying they're keeping Billy Napier. He's not saying that Billy Napier's completely safe, but he's just saying there's no urgency, which tells me exactly what you're saying there, that he may stick around a couple more weeks. I mean, because quite honestly, if there's not a very suitable interim, I don't know what it suits you to fire him. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I guess because also he plays a pretty big role in your play calling as the offensive coordinator. I do know that Dan Enos' name has been tossed around as an interim coach because he's on the off-field staff.
Oh, buddy, yeah, it get worse.
Old friend, don't check your email, Dan. I think that reading that the urgency thing was, if I was a Florida fan, I don't know that I'd be really concerned about it. It just feels like with all I know there's some question about Scott Strickland. There's also the president. Right. Do they have an interim? There's a lot of uncertainty there, and it may take some time to sort out. But also, if you don't feel confident that Dan Enos or someone else can lead your team the rest of the way, maybe you stick with it until you have that stuff sorted out, and then you make the move.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, make no mistake, we're not saying keep Billy Napier. I mean, it's gotten to the point where the rival fans want you to keep Billy Napier. That's
Right.
That's always the best
That's a
sign
bad
that
sign. Yeah.
it's time to let him go. You know what?
Yeah. Love all the Tennessee and Florida State fans who I've seen coming. I think they need to keep Billy Napier. That's usually a bad sign if you're Florida, but or any team for your head coach.
All right, how about this one, Steven? Again, I think this could be a lot better game than some people are realizing here. We've got Vanderbilt on the road at Missouri. Missouri favored by 20.5 points. The over-under is 53.5. Game kicks off at 3:15 Central Time on the SEC Network. Who do you like in this one?
I like Missouri, and I've got them 38-17 here. I've wondered if maybe that's too high of a prediction for Missouri. Maybe it needs to be a little closer. But I like the way this defense, played for the most part last week against Boston College. And Vanderbilt presents some of the same challenges, especially with a quarterback in Diego Pavia, who is as dynamic. Thomas Castellano is probably a little bit more of a dynamic playmaker, but Pavia is up there too. So they got kind of a good almost kind of intro into Vanderbilt by having to play a quarterback like that. Also, I think just the way that Vanderbilt's secondary has played this year, they've given up a lot of yards to Virginia Tech. They gave up a lot of yards to Georgia State. There's a real opportunity here for Brady Cook and Luther Burden to continue building that connection again that we saw last week and hit some big plays. Maybe the only thing that's kind of been missing so far this season. So I think Vanderbilt fights well here, but I think Missouri pulls away in the end. So I'm going to go with Missouri 38, Vanderbilt 17, and that gives Missouri 5 straight wins over Vanderbilt in this series.
And something you referenced there, Stephen, Vanderbilt's secondary struggling this year. Well, I wouldn't quite say struggling for Brady Cook, but I would firmly say he's not quite lived up to the hype that at least I put on him. So I'll put it squarely on myself here. But the touchdown to interception, I mean, he's only got 2 passing touchdowns. He's got several rushing, and the yards per attempt are both 12th in the SEC. So what do we need to see from Brady going up against a weaker secondary? I mean, this feels like this has to be a get right type game for Brady Cook with conference play heating up. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would. I would like to see him kind of, I don't want to say he's necessarily been off or anything like that, but it just feels like he could play a more complete game. And especially kind of like we were talking about just a minute ago, the big plays, a little bit more consistency, sort of looking like the Brady Cook that we saw last year. So I think you'd like to see a little bit more complete performance, maybe a little bit of an uptick overall in sort of the passing yards and the touchdowns. But to your point, you get Vanderbilt, then you're on the road against Texas A&M, and you also have Alabama coming up in November. So I don't necessarily think there's anything wrong yet with this offense, but I think you want to see it get back on track because those 2 showdowns in the month of October could really make or break Missouri's playoff hopes this year.
Mm-hmm, right, and particularly the one I'm circling is at on the road at Texas A&M with the defense they have.
Yeah.
Like you have to be really on point to potentially score, 30 points on the road. I mean, I think that's going to be very difficult.
Yeah.
Not even. I don't know how good Notre Dame is, but they were they were billed as a top 10 team, and they only got 23 on them. So, I mean, it's likely going to be a low scoring type game. So that's the one I really need to see Brady Cook get going here this week against Vanderbilt, because 1 or 2 games is an anomaly for, again, not that he's been horrible, but 4 games subpar. I'd say it. That's maybe who he is this year if he does that again on Saturday.
I think if he has a sluggish performance, I will probably be a little bit concerned going into the A&M game. There also is, and I don't know if there's any truth to this or not. I'll just throw this out there, but when you think about their schedule, Murray State, Buffalo, BC, Vanderbilt, how much do you need to open it up to win those games? Obviously Boston College was close last week. So I don't know. I mean, at some point if you're doing that, it could burn you, and maybe it would have burned them last week. I guess. I guess what I'm trying to get at is if Missouri was holding back, I think now would be the time to probably open it up and give Brady Cook and those weapons a chance to get on the same
Mm.
page.
I didn't
for
even
your
think
A&M.
about that, Stephen. That's genius. And we know for a fact last season they did that. They held stuff
Yeah,
back, even though they claimed they weren't. And they held it back for Kansas State when they needed it. Yeah. So yeah, something I had not even considered. But certainly they got the running game going. They got these dynamic receivers. I mean, I truthfully, Stephen, I think they're just like a couple big plays away. And they're there.
yeah.
They're just missing them. If they can connect on those, then Missouri's offense is exactly who we thought they were.
But you also have to be able to flip that switch and can't just do it on the road against A&M too. So there
Right.
is a little bit of, show us this week and show us you're trending in the right direction before that big showdown, because you don't want to have to go on the road and play A&M's defense with the offense not firing on full cylinders and kind of counting on going from 7 to 10 on the switch meter there.
Mm-hmm. All right. How about this one, Stephen? Even before we went live on the air, Stephen said, "Oh man, where are you leaning? Because I'm torn on this one." Arkansas on the road at Auburn. Auburn's favored by 3.5 points. The over/under's 58.5 total points. This game kicks off 2:30 Central Time on ESPN. Stephen, your debating is over. You must make a decision here. Who's winning? Arkansas at Auburn.
Oh, Mike only knows half of the agony here, because I have been changing my mind on this game, I don't know, 4 or 5 times now since I looked at the schedule on Sunday. And it's really, I think, one of the biggest mysteries of the week. So it has a ton of intrigue. And I think just on the individual matchups, like we talked about on Monday, it feels like the winner of this game has an opportunity, because Arkansas has got a lot of tough games coming up. You can build some momentum if you're Sam Pittman. If you're Auburn, you can kind of erase that loss to California with Hank Brown now at quarterback, show you're trending in the right direction. So there's a lot at stake here, it feels like, for both teams. I am very curious to see how Arkansas's defensive front battles in this game, because Auburn's had some issues on the offensive line. Hank Brown is making his first SEC start. Can this group create some disruption? And on the other side of things, Taylor Green against an Auburn secondary that has been vulnerable this year. But also with that, you've got to get some consistency. 12th in the SEC in completion percentage. I need to see more down-to-down consistency in the passing game. But he also brings that big play element that on the ground, he could have a 60-yard touchdown, and that might be the ultimate equalizer. So the two quarterbacks are huge X factors here. It's a toss-up. I'm going to take Auburn 30, Arkansas 27, largely because Auburn is at home. And if the game is close, I think the Tigers find a way to win. I'm a little bit worried about Arkansas in that scenario after the Oklahoma State game this year.
Mm-hmm. And if this may be too bold to say, Stephen, but if Arkansas loses this game, would you predict that Sam Pittman is the coach next year? And I'm not saying we got to fire him because we lost to Auburn on the road. It's a difficult environment. But I guess what I'm leading you towards here is, if we're 2-2 to start, given the remaining schedule, I see one gimme, maybe two if you want to throw in Mississippi State. So we're saying 4 wins, and then the rest. Not that you can't beat any of these other teams, but it would essentially be an upset if you beat anybody other than Louisiana Tech or Mississippi State. So will this be a defining game, you think, for Sam Pittman?
I think so. And I'm looking at that schedule and seeing October 12th as an off week, and also November 9th. And those to me loom very large in this equation, because if you start thinking, if you're Arkansas and you lose to Auburn, you lose to A&M, Tennessee, and potentially LSU, that's 5 losses at that point. And so it's going to be hard to get to bowl eligibility, which is what I think Sam Pittman probably needs to come back next year. And this game kind of looms as a swing game. It's got to be, for both teams. I think it's huge for Auburn, and same thing for Arkansas. If you want to go to a bowl game this year, You got to beat Mississippi State, you got to beat Louisiana Tech, and I think you got to win this one. So I do. I think this stretch of games could be very critical to determining Sam Pittman's fate there at Arkansas.
Yeah, so I could easily swing it the other way, Stephen. If Auburn's 2-2 after this game, let's say they drop it, and they very well could, we're sitting here at 2-2, which I would think 95%, if not more, of our fan base expected to be 4-0 with these 4 home games to start, and we're sitting here 2-2. I'm not suggesting we turn around and fire Hugh Freeze, but what do you think the temperature of his seat would be by the end of the year, projecting ahead, if we're 2-2 in this first 4? Because the same thing I said about Arkansas, I can easily say about Auburn. I certainly would not pick them to beat Georgia or Missouri, both on the road. I wouldn't pick them to beat Alabama on the road. And then, quite frankly, Oklahoma, Vanderbilt, A&M, and Kentucky, those are likely toss-ups at best. Again, if this is a 2-2 team after 4 games, would you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, I would. And I think thinking about the schedule kind of in the way that you framed it there, I would almost think their ceiling is 6 victories, which is kind of hard because that when you look at their schedule in the preseason, you saw the home slate. And I think at minimum, you thought if they can just win those home games, and A&M is tough before you play Alabama, Oklahoma is tough, obviously. But if you could get to 7, that represents progress from the year before where they win 6. And I think the things that would concern you if you just get to 6, which is the inconsistency from week to week. I mean, losing to Cal, but Auburn could show up and beat Missouri in a few weeks. And at 6 wins, you're at the same mark you were last year, and it's hard. I think it's harder to sell that confidence and positivity, proof of concept that I think you need to keep kind of building that. The proof of concept at 6 wins and back to back gets a little cloudy. So I don't think Hugh Freeze would be on the hot seat, but I think maybe we start to wonder a little bit more about direction going into 2025.
I'll put him on a hot seat for you, Stephen.
All
Don't
right.
you worry. But all right, now let's talk game of the week. ESPN College Game Day, Stephen, descending to Norman, Oklahoma for Tennessee at Oklahoma. Tennessee favored by 7 points, over under 57.5 total points. Game kicks off 6:30 Central on ABC. Who wins this one, which could be another defining game for both these programs?
Man, I am fired up for this game because Oklahoma's SEC opener, the way they have played this year, I am eager to figure out this team and sort of get them on a huge stage and evaluate just where Oklahoma is, as a full-time SEC member now. I think one of the hardest things about this matchup is trying to figure out what is Oklahoma's path to victory. And I think it has to start with Brent Venables and this defense. And every time I think about Brent Venables when he was at Clemson, it was big time matchups that defensive front showed out. And so that's kind of where I'm going with this in Oklahoma is the defensive front is going to have to win. And they're going to have to probably, both defenses to some extent will probably have to bend a little bit, but don't break. So can Oklahoma win enough on the defensive front to slow down Dylan Sampson, to slow down Nico? And then I think when Oklahoma has the ball offensively, I am going to be interested in seeing how that front blocks James Pierce and blocks that Tennessee defensive front. Because I think on paper, that's probably the biggest mismatch in this game. As much as, I think Nico, I think Jackson Arnold's going to play well. I think the Tennessee run game may eventually get on track here. But for me, it's the Oklahoma offensive line and how they block that Tennessee front. So I'm having a hard time almost talking myself into finding a path for Oklahoma to win this game because of that. And I think they could be in a lot of 3rd and longs. Obviously, Nick Anderson coming back, pairing with Deion Burks against this Tennessee secondaries is a great opportunity. And I think Jackson Arnold's legs last week were huge. So I think Oklahoma's offense may crank it up a bit this week. That being said, I think Tennessee's the better team. edge in the line of scrimmage, and it shows up in the fourth quarter. Give me Tennessee 34, Oklahoma 20.
Oh, wow.
So I'm taking the Volunteers by 2 touchdowns here.
Stephen, I have been fooled by Tennessee before. And this, just caution, I'm cautioning people. I'll be there. I've said this before, but I'll say it again. Here's the last couple games I went to, Stephen. Oklahoma coming to Neyland Stadium, had the ball, what was it, 4th and 1 from the 1-inch line. Butch Jones kicks field goal. That game goes into overtime. Tennessee loses. And then after that, I went to the Ole Miss game where Tennessee had a touchdown taken off the board, throwing mustard bottles, throwing golf balls. Joe Milton, right before everybody forgets this. He ran out of bounds as time expired. And so Tennessee automatically lost. It was the stupidest play ever. But right before that, he threw a pass. It was 3 inches away from being a game winner. So, I mean, it was that close. I went to the bowl game that year. They played Purdue, and never in my life, Stephen, have I seen forward progress stopped on the goal line by a running back it was on 4th and goal. They stopped it, and then the guy reached over and scored a touchdown, but they wiped, they said no touchdown. I never in my life have I seen that. So I'll be at this game. So you're probably dead wrong, Stephen. Oklahoma's going to win in dramatic fashion, and it's going to be wild. So if that happens, I'm never going to another game again.
Judging by your track record, I guess if you're an Oklahoma fan, you're probably feeling pretty good right now with SEC Mike in attendance. You summed up the Joe Milton experience well there. Almost a crazy, awesome touchdown pass, and then just calmly running out of bounds to end the game. That's the 2 plays that summed up the Joe Milton experience more than ever. But man, I mean, there's so many interesting angles. And of course, we didn't even talk about Josh Heupel going back to Oklahoma, but with Oklahoma in its first SEC game, I think obviously the moment, the crowd, the home atmosphere is going to be awesome there. But I think Tennessee's the better team. Maybe I'm a little bit confident on the 14-point spread there, but I think Tennessee wins. I think they're just a better team.
What if Oklahoma's defensive line, though, is able to control Tennessee's offensive line, which I don't think that is highly unrealistic to say? Could that be a path to Oklahoma winning this game?
Absolutely. And I think, we saw this against NC State as high as we are in Nico's talent. I think he is human. He can throw interceptions. He can make mistakes still. It's his first true road start. So I do think Oklahoma's defensive front is capable of creating some disruption. And if you can get a couple turnovers, short fields, that helps your offense. So I don't think Oklahoma's offense is all of a sudden going to snap out of this kind of, I don't want to say funk, but there's still a lot of questions here. But you're adding Nick Anderson back, and and Jackson Arnold is kind of trending up, I think, for the most part after the way he played against Tulane. So there are some paths there. It's defense doing its job, offense putting together enough drives. And I think if you're Oklahoma, a lower scoring game probably benefits you. I think the higher it goes, probably that benefits Tennessee.
Mm-hmm. Let's say Oklahoma does win, though, Stephen. Do they skyrocket into your next week's playoff projections, or do they still have something to prove?
No, they go in. That would be a win that would shoot them into the top 10. So they would absolutely join the playoff conversation, because I've got them on the bubble right now. But if they beat Tennessee, a top 5, top 10 team, they absolutely deserve to be in next week's playoff projection.
All right, one last thing I got for you, because I know we're running out of time here. But if Tennessee turns the ball over 0 times, is there any chance they lose this game?
I guess there's always a path, but I think what you're kind of getting at
or how likely, I guess, is the real,
Yeah, I think Oklahoma needs a break, right? I think that's kind of the way I would look at this game. And this is just based upon everything we've seen so far. Maybe Oklahoma's holding back something offensively. It wouldn't surprise me if Seth Littrell has a few tricks ready for Saturday night. But I think Oklahoma needs a break. So I think if you're Oklahoma and you're +2, +3, all of a sudden that definitely goes, kind of increases your odds of the upset. So if you're Tennessee, play a clean game, I think straight up, that's kind of why I said I just think they're the better team here.
Mm-hmm. And Matt is mad we're talking Tennessee, It's game of the week.
Yeah.
Oklahoma Tennessee game day. I mean, I don't know. That's a crazy comment to make. But all right, Steve, before you go, can you tell the people where can they find you? Where can they find your work?
Absolutely. You can follow me at Athlon Sports. Check out all my work where we talk about all 134 teams, not just Tennessee. And you can follow me on Twitter at Athlon Steven and Steven L CFB on Facebook and Instagram.
All right, Stephen, I appreciate you as well. Always better luck this week on your prediction. Oh, wait. And I think you didn't give me your lock of the week, did you?
Ole Miss. That's
Ole Miss.
yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. So that's Stephen's lock of the week. May he have better odds than last week when I was the only one to win. We'll catch you on the next one.